Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping into a really interesting space today, looking at claims made about scientific facts found within an ancient religious text.
That's right. Specifically, we're looking at assertions from a source, One Islam Productions on YouTube, focusing on what they present the Quran as containing regarding modern science.
So our mission here is to unpack the specific examples they discuss.
Exactly. These claims cover quite a range: cosmology, geology, biology, even aspects of the human body. We want to understand what the source claims these descriptions imply about the text itself, its age and origin.
Okay, so it's a conversation about some, well, potentially surprising claims and how this source connects them to modern science, arguing it anticipated later discoveries.
Precisely. They set the stage by suggesting this knowledge surfaces in a text from 1400 years ago.
Right, so where does the source start, looks like, with the big picture cosmology?
Yes, the universe.
Yeah.
The presenter highlights several points they say are in the Quran about the cosmos.
Okay, and what are those points, according to the source?
Well, they state the text mentions the universe is expanding
Expanding. Okay.
and that it had a common origin. Also, that it formed from a gaseous mass.
And the source emphasizes these are recent discoveries.
That's their angle, yes.
Yeah.
That science only figured these things out relatively recently.
Then they seem to move on to celestial bodies, the sun, the moon.
They do. It gets quite specific there.
Yeah.
They bring up Quranic verses mentioning night, day, the sun and the moon. And the claim is the text says each travels in an orbit with its own distinct motion.
Its own motion. How do they get that?
Well, they focus on the language. They discuss an Arabic verb, sabaha or yasbahuna.
Okay.
And their interpretation, the one presented in the source, is that this word implies movement with self-propulsion,
Yeah.
like swimming or moving under its own steam.
Self-propulsion. So not just being passively moved, but actively moving or rotating.
That's the interpretation they offer, yes.
Hmm.
They give examples like Earth rotating around the sun,
Right.
the sun rotating on its axis, and even orbiting the galactic center toward this solar apex.
And the key point the source makes is
That this detailed understanding individual motion, orbits, self-propulsion was supposedly laid out 1400 years ago in the text. That's the claim.
got it. Okay, let's dig into that a bit more. The source also talks about the shape of the Earth, connecting it to night and day.
Yes, they argue that the description of how night and day alternate implies a spherical Earth.
How so? What's the connection they make?
They point to specific verses 31.29 and 39.5 and highlight another Arabic word, kawara.
Kawara, and what does the source say that means?
Their interpretation is coiling a turban.
Coiling a turban, that's a very specific image.
It is, and they use it to argue the verse describes night and day sort of coiling around each other, merging smoothly.
Implying a round surface for them to coil around.
That's the suggestion, yes.
Yeah.
That this imagery points to an understanding of Earth's roundness.
Although the source does mention some ancient philosophers had thought the Earth was round.
They do acknowledge that, yeah. But they stress it wasn't, common knowledge or widely accepted. So finding this implication in the text is presented as significant.
And then there's something even more specific about the shape, isn't there? Something about an egg.
Ah, yes. This is presented as quite intriguing by the source. They highlight an interpretation of one verse, where the word used for Earth's shape is apparently the same word used for an ostrich egg.
An ostrich egg, not a perfect sphere then.
Exactly. The source suggests this aligns with modern science because the Earth isn't a perfect sphere. It's slightly flattened at the poles and bulging at the equator. Geoid, I think, is the term. Kind of like
an ostrich egg.
Yeah,
Display elongated or misshapen.
right. So they present this linguistic point as potentially aligning with that specific, more accurate, modern understanding of Earth's shape.
That's quite a connection they're drawing there. Okay, moving on from shape to light, the sun and moon's light.
Yes. Another distinction the source highlights, they claim the Quran describes the sun using the word siraj.
Siraj.
They translate it as shining lamp, something generating its own light and heat, like a source.
Okay, and the moon?
The moon is described as nur, which the source defines as light, but specifically light that originates from another source, reflected light, essentially.
So sun generates light, moon reflects it, which aligns with what we know now.
Correct. And again, the source's point is that while it aligns with modern understanding, this distinction wasn't necessarily common knowledge back then.
And they include an anecdote here about an astronomer.
They do. Professor Yoshidi Kusan, who they identify as the director of the Tokyo Observatory. The source quotes him expressing being very much impressed by finding astronomical facts in the Quran.
What particularly impressed him, according to the source?
The idea that the text seemed to speak about the whole universe, not just bits and pieces like modern astronomers often focus on. The source uses this to bolster the idea that the text has a comprehensive, maybe even divine perspective.
So, wrapping up the cosmology part, the source's method seems to be find a specific word or phrase, offer an interpretation, and argue it anticipates modern scientific knowledge.
That's pretty much the pattern in this section, yes. Highlighting language and drawing connections to recent science.
Okay, let's shift gears then. From the vastness of space down to Earth, geology, mountains specifically.
Right. The source makes some interesting claims here, too, based on verses like 78.67 and 31.10.
And these verses compare mountains to, what was it, tent pegs?
OTAD, yes. Tent pegs.
Okay, tent pegs. How does the source connect that image to geology? It seems a bit unusual.
Their argument hinges on how a tent peg works. You only see a small part above ground, right?
Sure, most of it is buried for stability.
Exactly. And the source claims modern tech, like sonar, shows mountains are similar. They have deep roots going way down into the Earth's crust.
Like the hidden part of the peg.
Precisely. So they present the Quran's description using OTAD as being remarkably prescient, matching this modern understanding of mountain structure.
So, the text describing mountains like pegs predates our discovery of their roots, in the source's view.
That's the claim. And they take it further, suggesting these roots, these pegs, act as stabilizers for the Earth's surface.
Stabilizers? How?
The source mentions two ways this might work, according to geological theories they reference. One is that the roots help stabilize tectonic plates.
Ah, maybe reducing earthquake frequency or intensity?
Potentially, yeah, by sort of pinning the crust. The other idea, which they note is more theoretical, is that the mass distribution might help smooth out the Earth's rotation, like balancing a spinning top.
But the main point they stress is the roots.
Yes, they emphasize that mountains having roots is now an established geological fact, and the Quran's comparison to tent pegs, they argue, captured this idea centuries ago. The presenter even mentions finding this point personally quite striking.
Okay, interesting comparison. Let's move from geology to biology and the human body. The source finds claims there too.
It does. Starting with life forms, bees. They point to Surah 16, which is called the bee. And they note that when the text talks about the bee that goes out, gathers nectar, builds the hive, it uses the female gender in Arabic.
The female form. And why is that significant according to the source?
Well, they contrast it with older beliefs. Apparently, some ancient views saw bees as, like, male soldiers led by a king bee.
Ah, okay. Not quite right.
Not right at all, scientifically. Modern biology shows the worker bees, the ones doing the foraging and building, are female, and the hive is led by a queen.
So the source says the Quran's use of the feminine aligns with modern science, unlike those older, incorrect ideas.
That's their argument, yes. They also briefly mention claims about plants having different genders and winds playing a role in fertilization, citing verse 15.22.
Quick mentions there. Then they shift to something even smaller matter itself. Atoms.
Yeah, they bring up the ancient Greek idea from Democritus that atoms were the smallest possible thing, indivisible. Atomos meaning uncuttable.
Right, the classical view.
But the source points to a verse, Quran 34.3, where it mentions God knows the weight of an atom, and then adds, or anything smaller than that.
Or anything smaller than that. And the source interprets this phrase how?
They interpret anything smaller as the text explicitly stating that things smaller than atoms exist.
So, anticipating the discovery of subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, electrons.
That's the connection they make. They claim the Quran preempted the modern understanding that atoms are divisible.
Okay, quite a claim. Let's move into the human body itself. Fingerprints come up.
Yes. The source first establishes the modern fact. Fingerprints are unique to every individual.
A key part of identity, forensics.
Sure. Then they cite verses 75.3 to 4. This passage talks about God's power to reassemble human bones on the Day of Judgment. And it specifically says, he can perfectly recreate even the very tips of his fingers.
The fingertips. And the source connects this specific mention to uniqueness.
That's the link they draw. They argue that singling out the fingertips points to an awareness of their unique and intricate nature, something science only fully appreciated much later. The idea is God is saying, I can recreate you down to this incredibly detailed, unique identifier.
That's their interpretation of why fingertips are mentioned. What about pain? The source discusses that too, right? Skin and bowels.
Yes, and this part is quite graphic in the descriptions the source uses. They focus on verse 4.56.
What does that verse describe?
It describes hellfire, saying that as people's skins are burned away, God will replace them with fresh skin specifically so they may taste the punishment.
Okay. And the scientific connection the source makes.
They explain the modern understanding that severe burns destroy nerve endings, the pain receptors in the skin. So if skin is completely burned, that specific area actually loses the sensation of pain.
I see. So the source argues the verse describes replacing the skin because the pain receptors would be gone in the burned skin.
Exactly. They interpret it as God ensuring the pain continues by constantly providing fresh skin with intact pain receptors. Yeah. Aligning the verse, in their view, with how skin and pain reception actually work.
That's a very specific reading. And a similar point about the bowels.
Sort of, yeah. They discuss descriptions of punishment involving the tree of Zakum boiling in bellies or scalding water cutting the bowels, citing verses like 37.6267.
Right.
The source then makes a distinction, claiming that significant pain receptors are located specifically in the bowels, making them highly sensitive, perhaps more so than the intestines generally. They present this as a modern physiological understanding.
And so the Quranic descriptions of agony centered on the belly or bowels
are interpreted by the source as aligning with this specific knowledge about where intense abdominal pain originates physiologically, another claimed alignment with modern science.
Right. So we've gone from the cosmos to mountains, bees, atoms, fingerprints, skin, bowels. Quite a tour. What's the source's big takeaway from all this, their concluding argument?
Well, they state it pretty directly. Finding all these specific points, which they argue align with modern science, in a 1,400-year-old text.
Things like the expanding universe, mountain roots, subatomic particle.
Right. All these things presented without internal contradiction. And, crucially, appearing before modern science supposedly discovered them. The source argues this serves as powerful evidence, or proof, that the text must have a divine origin.
That it couldn't have been known by humans at the time.
That's the core assertion. And they contrast this sharply with what they call ridiculous ancient myths.
They mention the Greek myth about the Milky Way?
Yes, as spilled milk from Hera. They use that as an example of the kind of fantastical explanation found in other ancient traditions, arguing that the Quran doesn't contain such things, but instead contains descriptions that, in their view, match reality.
Reinforcing their claim of factual accuracy, even predictive accuracy.
Exactly. That's the final note they strike.
Wow. Okay, that really was a deep dive into the specific claims presented in that source material, covering everything from the scale of the universe right down to, well, human anatomy and atoms.
And you can see their methodology focusing on particular words, specific interpretations, and drawing direct lines to concepts from modern science, whether it's astronomy, geology, or physiology.
It's definitely thought-provoking. So, for you listening, having heard this summary of the claims presented by the source, these alleged connections between an ancient text and modern scientific concepts, it really makes you consider the relationship between faith, historical texts, and scientific discovery, doesn't it?
What does it mean when these kinds of connections are drawn? How do we evaluate them? What does it prompt you to think about how we understand knowledge itself, both ancient and modern?
Definitely something to mull over. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. I hope you've gained some valuable insights. If you're a truth seeker, yearning for divine light and ready to step out of darkness, now is your moment. The truth is that Allah is the one and only creator of the universe. He has sent over 124,000 messengers and prophets to guide humanity, starting with Adam and culminating with the final messenger, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them all. If you resonate with this message, you might be ready to embrace Islam. Simply recite the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. For further support, feel free to join our WhatsApp group. You can send us a private message there. The link is in the video description. Don't wait until it's too late. We look forward to connecting with you soon.